What's up, family? So this right here is the moment the Indiana Fever's playoffs identity started to crack. And we're not just talking about a loss, we're talking about a systematic failure. So a 95-90 collapse against the Minnesota Lynx that exposed two brutal, uncomfortable truths the Fever organization seems terrified to admit. And look, I'm not pulling any punches. We're just going to say what every fan is thinking. This loss forces us to ask two massive questions. Is the current coaching staff led by head coach um, Austin Kelly, while Stephanie White is away, capable of making adjustments to win in the clutch? And more importantly, is Aaliyah Boston anything more than a complimentary piece when Caitlin Clark isn't on the floor to orchestrate the entire offense? Because what we just witnessed wasn't just a bad game, it was a red flag, and it was exposure, and it's proof that this team without its generational superstar is living a lie. So let's get one thing straight. This isn't just about one regular season lost in August. This is about a pattern. This is about a franchise that is dangerously close to squandering the gift of Caitlin Clark because they can't seem to function without her. And the loss to the Lynx was the breaking point. It was the game where all the excuses finally ran out. And the argument here is simple. So I'm going to lay it out plainly. The coaching staff's inability to adjust and the team's complete defensive meltdown in the third quarter cost the Fever a critical game for their playoff positioning. And then this loss is the final damning piece of evidence that Aaliyah Boston is not the franchise altering number one option she was drafted to be. She's not a co-star, she's a fantastic co-pilot who just can't fly the plane by herself. And let's start with the sideline because with Stephanie White away from the team for personal reasons, acting head coach Austin Kelly is at the helm. And while this team has been decimated by injuries, most importantly, Clark being out with that nagging ankle injury, this is exactly when a coaching staff is supposed to earn its paycheck. And this is when you're supposed to be at your best. But instead, we witnessed an absolute defensive disaster because the Minnesota Lynx walked into Gainbridge Fieldhouse and dropped 95 points on their heads. And the Fever's defense was a rumor because they just let Jessica Shepard, a solid player, but not exactly a paranoid MVP candidate, have an historic night. Shepard recorded a triple double with 22 points when you go down and look at it, and 11 rebounds and 11 assists, and did it on an insane 10 for 11 in shooting. And she looked like an all-time great because the Fever's defensive scheme made her one. And there was no resistance, no adjustment, no answer. And then, you know, we seen what Shea Petty did when Brianna Turner gave her the ball. That was amazing, a little pump fake, and then she got the corner three, and she knocked down the triple for her first points with the squad. That's amazing and all. And then we had Lexi Hall. It was phenomenal. She scored her career high versus Minnesota in this game, 23 points. And she was lighting it up beyond the arc.
Set at
You see her shooting the three
164.5.
right there
Lexi Hall dials
after
up.
purposes. And then you see her cutting to the basket in transition.
Boston goes backdoor to Hull, working on
puts a
Williams.
little
Hull gets it to
fadeaway,
go, and a foul.
and it goes from there, right? You guys see it,
Second All-Star appearance
she's a
was right
defensive
here in
threat,
Indianapolis
of
back in
course, but
July.
also she know how to score in a key
Looking
moment,
inside for
especially
Boston.
beyond
She
the
will
arc when
launch
needed to do so.
and knock down a
And they
three.
were doing
Lexi
amazing
Hall's
in
in
the
a
first
pair.
half. In the first
Shot at
quarter,
the end of that
especially.
game,
I don't know what happened. You know what I'm saying? It was like
here's Hull backdoor, puts
a
on the
damning
brakes
down
and lay it
evidence.
in.
And it
It's a
reminds
Lexi
me
Hall
of
show here
how
in
the
the
Indiana
first for
Fever
Indiana
does
defensively on
great in
Sunday.
the
And
first
Stephanie
half,
White
but they
said that's
cannot
earned her some
finish
more
to
playing
close out
time here.
games. And it seemed to be,
Chloe Bibby's
that's
absence,
still an
you'll likely
issue,
see
and
a
I'm
lot
not
of
oblivious.
Turner on the
I'm
floor
not
here today as
obviously
Lexi Hall
not good,
launches and
but
hits.
they're
It's a
damping down
three-point
or tampering
parade.
down injuries and stuff like that. So I'm not being objective here and
Here is
even
Hull.
and
Look
well
how
grounded when
aggressive
I do my
Lexi Hall
assessment
has
and
been
have this
here in the first
conversation with you
half.
guys.
That was her
But
8th shot attempt, and she's 6
you
of 8
guys
from
get
the
my
floor.
point. They still have to close out games
16 in
regardless,
the
and they have
first
to
half for
figure out how to
McBride.
do it
Hull
with
catch and
out
shoot,
there
knocks down
superstar whoever
another.
else. regardless, they got to come together. So that was her career high. And then this was her, Lexi Hall, with 3 triples in the first half, right? And that was the amazing part. They do amazing in the first half, no doubt about it. And then when you look at this thing, though, you know, and you really look at the defensive disaster and how the Minnesota Lynx went in there, the entire game flipped in the third quarter when the Lynx outscored the Fever 32-17. And that is a coaching catastrophe. That's a coaching catastrophe because where were the halftime adjustments? Where was the fire? Where was the new defensive look to throw Minnesota off his rhythm? The team came out flat and got systematically picked apart, and that falls directly on the coaching staff leading the team that night. So this isn't an isolated incident. This is a team that looks completely different, almost lost without its superstar. Coaches have talked about the special chemistry between Clark and Boston, the instinct they have. But when one part of that equation is missing, the whole system seems to crumble. And you shouldn't need your generational talent on the floor just to have a coherent defensive identity, at least. And for a team clinging to a playoff spot, to watch them get out scheme and out hustle in a game with this much on the line is just unforgivable. And they didn't just lose, they were embarrassed on their home floor by historic individual performance, and they did absolutely nothing to stop. But let's be clear. This loss, um, this loss isn't just on the coaching, okay? It is exposed as a much bigger, more uncomfortable problem for the Indiana Fever. Aaliyah Boston inability to be the leader this team desperately needs when Clark is in street clothes. And now before the Boston defenders rush to the comments and so forth, let's look at the facts. Yes, she's having a good year, averaging around 15 points per game. I'll give her that, right? I'm being very objective here. 6 rebounds, and while Jessica Shepard was etching her name into the history books, Boston was a non-factor when it mattered most. And this is the whole issue. The narrative of Aaliyah Boston as a franchise cornerstone feels like a fraud. She's an elite level finisher. She's a fantastic recipient of a pass, but she is not a primary creator, and she is not a player who can put a team on her back and drag them across the finish line. And the eye test is undeniable. With Caitlin Clark on the floor, the Indiana Fever look like a legitimate threat. The moment Clark steps off, the team looks often lost. That swing isn't just about losing Clark scoring and assists. It's about how her gravity creates space for everyone, especially Boston. And without Clark warping the defense and drawing double teams, Boston is left to create for herself. And she struggles to do it at an elite level. And she herself has admitted this season has been about adjusting. And that's not what a franchise player says. That's what a support piece says. And before we get into this, what this all means for the Fever's future, I want to hear from you in the comments. And am I being too harsh on the coaching staff in Boston? Or are you seeing the same massive cracks in the foundation that I am? And is this team in real trouble without Clark as well? Drop your take below and don't forget to subscribe for more honest WNBA analysis. So why does this one loss feel so catastrophic? Because it's a preview of the Fever's future if they don't get this figured out and fast. And this loss wasn't just a hit to their playoff seeding. It was a complete validation of every fear Fever fans had since the moment Clark went down with her ankle injury and so forth. And the fear is that this organization is wasting a once-in-a-generational talent. You have a player in Caitlin Clark who changes the entire geometry of the court, and the team around her is proven to be fundamentally dependent on her. And the franchise is marketing a dynamic duo, but we're seeing as a singular superstar and a cast of characters who aren't ready to co-lead. This game against Minnesota proved that without Clark, this team doesn't just lose her production. They lost their identity, and their defense becomes porous, and their coaching seems reactive instead of proactive. And their supposed number 2 star looks just like another player on the court. So the implications are terrifying. What happens in the first round of the playoffs if Clark isn't 100%? We just saw the answer. They could get run off the floor. And what does this mean for Aaliyah Boston's future, right? When I really think about this, it means the Fever have to seriously ask if she's the right long-term co-star or if she's a high-end trade asset to go find a player who can actually create her own offense in the biggest moments. And this isn't about building for the future anymore. The future is now, and the clock is ticking. And every game, like the one against Minnesota, is a day wasted, a step backward, and another crack into the foundation of what's supposed to be a dynasty. So let's call it what it is. The 95-90 loss to the Minnesota Lynx wasn't a fluke. It was an organizational failure that pulled back the curtain and showed everyone the truth about this team. And it revealed a coaching staff that was outmaneuvered and a star player who shines brightest, only one reflecting the light of an even bigger star. So Kelsey Mitchell can score. She can score 27 points. You know what I'm saying? Um, she can score 27 points. And Lexi Hall can have a career high 23 points as I'm looking at the screen. But if it means nothing if the team's core identity is broken and this game proved the system is flawed. So the question for the Indiana Fever is no longer can we survive without Caitlin Clark? We know the answer to that. The real question, the one the front office needs to be asking itself is who's this team true number two? Because after watching Jessica Shepard hang a historic triple-double on them while their own star faded into the background, we know one thing for sure. The answer is in Aliyah Boston. And no shade to her. But what do you think the single biggest move the Fever need to make to fix this? Is it a coaching issue? Is it a roster issue? Let me know your solution in the comments below. I know they play the Minnesota Lynx again tonight at 7 p.m. And I'll do my honest breakdown and take on that. But thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.